So we're at day 3 here at the Arc Forum Festival, and I'm very pleased to be joined by Marcel van Hattem. Marcel's the chair of the Foreign Affairs Committee in the Chamber in Brazil and also the leader of the opposition. Welcome today.
Thank you very much, Alan. It's a pleasure to speak with you, especially in this beautiful event.
So we were at a free speech event last night talking about some of the impacts in Britain and Europe and internationally, and you spoke as well. But just take us on a little journey about what's been happening in Brazil, if you would, please.
Well, what we have right now in Brazil is really censorship. We had X blocked for over 3 weeks, putting Brazil aside with other 6 countries in the world that ban X. We have thousands of people who are censored now in the country, who cannot use social media, cannot communicate with other people because they are allegedly supporters of a attempted coup d'etat in January 8th in Brazil, very similar to what happened in the United States with January 6th. But I am also a target right now, by the way. I'm a target of lawfare there. I am a member of Brazilian Congress, and I'm being investigated, and I was indicted for a speech I gave in the parliament's floor. It's ridiculous. Like, I denounced a police agent for abuse of authority, for misbehaving in his role as a police agent, and I am the one that's being investigated. So, but where did it all start? It's very important to say, because not many people, of course, follow the whole situation in Brazil. So in 2018, we had the election of Jair Bolsonaro. At the time, Lula was in jail. Lula was in jail for corruption and money laundering. He was convicted by judges in the regional area and also in Brasilia. That is, he went to all levels of courts, and he was in jail serving his time for this conviction. But after Bolsonaro took office in April 2019, the same car wash operation had a whistleblower that told the press that a justice called Dias Toffoli, then he was the president of the Supreme Court of Brazil, was involved also in the car wash corruption scandal. And this is when hell broke loose in Brazil. Justice Toffoli decided to open an inquiry. He delegated it to another justice, Alexandre de Moraes, completely unlawful, unconstitutional, just appoint another judge to preside over an inquiry, and censored magazine Cruzoé, who brought that story. At the time, in April 2019, media in Brazil reacted, and strongly. So they decided to give it up, at least for that moment, on the censorship of Cruzoé magazine because of the reaction of traditional media. But they started to target all Bolsonaro supporters and people on the right for extremist speech and for fake news, all allegations that, of course, mainly are false, but to persecute opposition and persecute those who were accusing the court of being involved in corruption scandals or the members of the Supreme Court. And that is how Lula ended up out of jail. His processes were annulled. They used all this narrative that there was a big, fake news going on corruption in Brazil to rehabilitate Lula da Silva. He ran for the presidency. They censored Bolsonaro in all possible ways. They really interfered in the Brazilian elections with many decisions from the court that were actually benefiting Lula. I can give you some examples. Bolsonaro, for instance, could not say that Lula was friends with Maduro or with Ortega. Even the media couldn't say that. In October 2022, in September 2022, just 1 month before the election, Gazeta do Povo, a traditional newspaper in Brazil, published a story saying that Lula was friends with Maduro and Ortega, and it was censored by the electoral court in Brazil. Guess what? Now Lula receives Maduro in Brasilia as his big friend, and there was nothing wrong about saying that. It was the truth, but the electoral court said that Bolsonaro and Gazeta do Povo, in this case, were defaming the candidate. So in the end, now Lula is president of the republic. He has the federal police under his authority, and he's using the federal police and his partnership with the Supreme Court to persecute the opposition, in which, of course, I include myself, and this is where we and how we got here.
So, I mean, it's a shocking series of events, and lawfare is used increasingly. We've seen it happen in the States. We have our own experience in Britain with some of the people being imprisoned here for posts they've made on social media and other areas. What is the reaction and response of many people in Brazil on the ground, the public?
Well, this is why this kind of events like ARC are very important, because you get out of your country, you think a little bit more broadly about the events that are taking place there, also here and in America. And I would say that one of the most important things is that we have to have the conscience that Bolsonaro will pass, Lula will pass, Marcel and Hattem will pass, but the institutions, they stay. And what we are seeing currently in Brazil is a corrosion of the institutions. This is the worst part, because we're not talking only about people being persecuted, individuals that are suffering injustice, but we are talking also about a corrosion of the institutions that can lead into a permanent dictatorship. So what we see now in Brazil is people afraid of talking, practicing self-censorship, having difficulty even to remain in their country. I see many people living now in America, for instance, or in Argentina, even in London, in England, people who are leaving the country because they are afraid they can be persecuted. Some of them are persecuted. We have journalists, for instance, in America. Rodrigo Constantino is one example, that had his passport canceled in Brazil by Justice Alexandre de Moraes. His assets are all frozen in Brazil. He's now fighting a cancer, and he couldn't access his money in Brazil to fund his own health treatment. So this is what we get when we have the institutions being corroded, and now we're facing this for 6 years. In April, it's going to be 6 years of these inquiries.
And, Elon Musk has been very vocal about free speech and about X, and it's played a significant role in the United States and internationally. We've seen J.D. Vance's speech on free speech in Germany. A lot of reactions in Europe against that by some, very similar to some of the things you're describing in Brazil, some of the responses. Have you reached out to Elon Musk about this? What's the situation as far as it goes with X?
No, definitely. By the way, Elon Musk had even retweeted some of my posts. He is a ally of Brazil, and he's also a victim. He is being investigated in Brazil. Can you believe that? When Justice Alexandre de Moraes decided to block X from Brazil on the unlawful ground that X didn't have a legal representative in Brazil, which is absurd. Many companies are in Brazil with no legal representatives, but they decided to block X on that ground. Elon Musk defied Justice Alexandre de Moraes on Twitter too, and what happened is that he was put into the investigation as well. And worse than that, or even as bad as that, Alexandre de Moraes decided to block the assets of SpaceX, which is another company, to pay the fines that he was imposing on X because X didn't have a legal representative in Brazil. Just so crazy. It's absurd what's going on. So now that Trump is in government in the United States, we have hope that many things will change. Also because some of the crimes that have been committed by the Supreme Court justices and by the federal police had the help of American authorities. I mean, US aid had been funneled to sponsor NGOs in Brazil, even events by the electoral court, for instance, together with other institutions. So there's American taxpayers' money being used in Brazil to sponsor persecution, political persecution. And we have also the Felipe Martins case, which had become very known internationally after Mario O'Grady wrote on the Wall Street Journal about it. He was kept in prison for almost 6 months in Brazil on the grounds that he could fly away, that he could escape from the country last year, February 2024, because he allegedly left Brazil with Bolsonaro in December 2022 when Bolsonaro went to Florida. The thing is, he never left with Bolsonaro to Florida. Somebody in the CBP in Orlando, and this investigation has to go until the end, had defrauded the entry registration of Felipe Martins. So somehow somebody in the American government decided that Felipe Martins should remain in jail for almost 6 months on this basis, on this allegation that he left Brazil with this fake registry. So we have to go to the end, and this is why actually I'm also being persecuted, because I exposed this case in the House floor, and the police didn't like it, of course, because they are exposed. They used this false information in their report to keep him in prison, in jail, and now I'm being investigated. Actually, I'm now indicted too.
One of the things that people in Britain might think is that in Brazil, historically, there have been issues that have been different to Europe and America in the sense of the relationship between the state and the public, and a different history to how we've got here. But it seems like many of these things are happening that are happening in Brazil, are happening in Britain, they're happening across Europe, they're happening in America. What do you think it can stop that? How do you see it in the opposition? What's your hope? How are things in terms of the public and engaging them? Where do you see all of that?
No, that's a great question. Actually, when we see what's going on in UK, also in the United States and other countries, first, we don't feel alone, but we also see that the situation is much worse than we would have expected, because Brazil doesn't have that strong institutions as America has or the UK has. It's also not a country, a failed state, as you would call many other countries. It is a country with some democratic tradition. Since 1988, we have a new constitution and so on. Rule of law normally is applied and so on. But what we see is that if we don't act internationally together, and I hope to answer this question with this, we won't find a way out. So this is why this kind of events are important. I've been traveling also to the United States, to other places in Europe, in Latin America, to tell about Brazilian stories so that people understand what's going on. And to some extent, Brazil has been a role model for other dictators around our country. So people have to understand where this all can lead. And what I think is that we have to be very strong, like Donald Trump is being now, in cutting funds to anyone who is sponsoring censorship. This is really crucial. So at day one, when Trump decided to stop cutting funds, to exposing where US aid money is going, this was already very good news, because many people who are dependent on this money to do their jobs, dirty jobs that is, are now actually completely insecure. Some are already fired from their jobs, and this actually is good news for us. So we have to continue to work internationally, because they are working internationally. It's an international trend, and we cannot stop talking about it wherever we can.
Well, Marcel, thank you very much. The conference is about to start again. It's really good to talk with you. We'll be following what's going on, and good luck with the fight. It's a universal fight. These values that are being discussed here about freedom of speech and freedom of protest and the right to be an individual in society. Any final thoughts that you would share just on next steps and where things are at?
Well, definitely. Well, I want to thank you, Alan, because this opportunity is great, right? And I am going back to Brazil now this week. Every time I go back to my country, I fear that when I show my passport, I'm going to be going to a separate room, maybe to be interrogated, have my cell phone seized, whatever, because this is their tactics, right? This is how they operate. So why do I go back to my country? Maybe you're asking. Many people say, just, have a better life somewhere else. Don't do it to yourself. And I reply, well, because I don't want to live in another country. I want to live in another Brazil. right? I want to live in a more just Brazil, in a more democratic, a freer Brazil. And it's my responsibility. So it's the responsibility of my people, of the Brazilian people to fight for our country. And I think the same applies everywhere. We have to stand for what we believe. If we don't fight for what we believe, then what we believe is not worth really fighting for.
Fantastic. Well, I really think that's a great point to finish on. And our own Prime Minister, who ran away from speaking to the farmers recently, who knew what was happening when we had riots happening in the summer, and we've had people in prison for social media posts, who wants to suffocate more free speech, should hear some of this. And we want to make sure that everyone out there, you make sure your MPs and councillors and the government all hear from you about how important free speech is. Marcel, thank you so much for speaking to us today. Good luck with everything. We'll be following very, very much.
Thank you. Same to you. Good luck. Thank you for the opportunity.